In this video, we are going to talk about how to properly apply hair loss topicals without making your hair look super greasy. Even if you have medium to long hair, even if you have diffuse thinning, there's a very easy way to do this. We're going to show you how in this video. We're going to use a demonstration serum from Ulo. So there are a lot of different topical formulations out there. There are sprays, there are foams, there are serums, and generally each has its advantages and each has its drawbacks. So let's talk about foams. Foams are really easy to apply, they're fast drying, but they leave a ton of residue on your hair and they almost feel like styling gel is stuck in. And then you have sprays, which make application so easy. But the downside is that with a spray, you're not actually getting most of the hair topical on your scalp, you're getting it in your hair. And we have to have these active ingredients touching the scalp so that they can actually go into the skin and start to affect the hair follicles. So how are we gonna do this? Well, I think that the best type of topical is a serum. And the reason why is because if you have the right applicator, like we have here, you can measure exactly how much you are going to apply. So in this case, we have a milliliter marker on this bottle, which means you can get the exact amount that you want to apply on a regular basis. And you can track this very easily. And the other thing about the applicator is that you can bypass medium to long hair as long as you know how to part the hair and put yourself in the best possible position to get as much of this on the scalp. Now, before I start to apply this, you want to look for serums that have a few different factors. First, you want a serum that has what's known as slow drip viscosity. So what does that mean? It basically means that the serum is going to drip slowly and not quickly all over your scalp. The reason why you want some ability for the serum to move is because you want it to spread out on the scalp skin. You want it to go around the hair, but you don't want it to drip so fast that it runs down the forehead before you can wipe it off. The next thing that you want to look for is really to have a serum that is relatively quick drying. So within 5 to 10 minutes, it's almost completely dried on the scalp. And that will allow you to go about your day without having to worry about looking greasy or anything like that. So search and try to find a serum that meets those two factors. We took a ton of time to formulate our Ulo products to have the exact criteria that we just described, but they're not the only brand out there doing this. There are some great brands that have serums, but above all, serums, I think, outperform foams and sprays for the reasons that we described earlier in this video. So how do you apply this? The first thing that you need to do is you need to make sure that your scalp is dry. Why can't your scalp be a little bit damp or wet when you're applying a topical? Well, if you have any moisture stuck in the scalp skin itself, there's going to be water droplets. And those water droplets, they want to wick onto the hair strands themselves. And when you have that wicking action, if you apply anything on top of that water, it's also going to get wicked onto the hair strands. Guess what happens if a topical is not on the scalp itself? If it's on the hair strands, it's not going to penetrate into the scalp skin. It's not going to have an effect. So when you apply your topical, try to make sure that your hair is 85 to 90% fully dried from after a shower, or just completely dried because you haven't taken a shower right before. The next thing that you want to think about is your application frequency. So most hair loss topicals are most effective if applied once in the morning, once at night. If you can't do that, it's okay. My recommendation, just double the application volume for a once daily exposure. But if you can, try to split this up into once in the morning, once at night. For this formulation, we recommend 2 milliliters of total application per day. I'm going to walk you through how to do that right now. So the first thing you do is you unscrew the bottle. You want to use the milliliter syringe to extract about 1 milliliter's worth of liquid that you're going to use to spread across the scalp. Now, this might not look like a lot to spread throughout the entire scalp, but I assure you that it can be done. I'm going to show you exactly how to do this. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to work in a front to back motion. And if you have medium to long hair, here's exactly how you might want to do this. If you have diffuse thinning, here's exactly how you might want to do this. First, you grab as much hair as you can. You lean forward and you start to apply at the zones that have some thinning. You want to do some dabbing motions just like this because you only want a couple of droplets to form in these areas, and it's going to spread throughout the scalp. Then you want to let the hair fall and continue this dabbing motion. Remember that a lot of this is going to move forward just due to gravity toward your hairline, so you can apply a little bit further back than you normally would. You grab here. You can see here that I do have some diffuse thinning toward the front, and it actually predominates more so toward the back of my scalp. This is what's known as male androgenic alopecia in a female presentation, where the hairline is retained, but you do have some global diffuse thinning. So I just covered the first quarter section of my scalp, and I've only used about 0.25 milliliters. We're going to continue to move back here. And you just want to grab the hair and dab, getting as much as you possibly can onto the actual scalp skin. You work your way back. And you work your way back in a systematic way, because if you don't do this, if you go and you try to spot check areas that you maybe hadn't covered before, you're going to grab the hair and you're going to spread the oil from the scalp onto the hair, and you're going to look greasy. And you don't want that from a topical. You want your topical to be cosmetically imperceptible when you're applying it. You go all the way back here and here. And it looks like I have still about 1/4 milliliter left. I'll cover the hairline again, but this is how easy it is to cover 1 milliliter's worth of liquid across the entire scalp. And you're done. Now, I can feel some of this liquid dripping toward my forehead. And if this happens for you, again, if it's a slow drip viscosity, well-formulated serum, you just push it back into the hairline, just like this. If you've done this correctly, some should drip forward. You want that. You want this to be spreading, but don't take your fingers, which now have some serum on them, and then push them through your scalp, because that's going to get a lot of grease onto your hair strands. And again, right now, you can't really tell that I just applied 1 milliliter's worth of serum throughout the scalp. It's disguised well because I got probably 95% of it in the actual scalp skin itself. Barely any is touching the hair. It's moving around the hairs at the base. So if you do this, the next thing that you want to do is you don't now want to go immediately style your hair. Instead, what you want to do is let this dry 5 to 10 minutes. And effectively, if you do that, by then the topical should be pretty well dried. And at that point, you can start to comb your hair, put gel in it, all of that kind of stuff. But you want to give it time, and you want to push any type of liquid that comes back into the hairline. So that's basically how to apply a hair growth topical on a daily basis. So what are some other things that you need to think about? Well, there are several. First, how long should you let this sit in your scalp before you wash it out? It actually depends on the ingredient. So say that you're using something like topical minoxidil. Well, studies show that over an 11.5-hour period, if you measure all of the minoxidil that would absorb into your scalp during that period of time, within the first hour, 50% of that minoxidil absorbs. And within the first 4 hours, 75% of that absorbs. So for topical minoxidil, you really only need it in your scalp skin 4 hours, 6 hours before you go and take a shower. But this is not the same with things like topical finasteride. These show a linear absorption rate that is hourly dependent. So the longer it's in your scalp skin, the longer you're going to see more results. So with all things considered, I think it's easiest to just let a topical like this sit in your scalp for a 6 to 10 hour window on average before you end up taking a shower. It's okay if you do multiple applications in a row without showering that out. If these are well formulated, they shouldn't be irritating. But in general, if you're applying it and then you're taking a shower a minute later, 2 minutes later, we're going to be sacrificing a lot of efficacy. So just consider this and consider the data when you're applying this regularly. And know that these results for these topicals, they typically only last for as long as you commit to using them. So with continued use, you'd hopefully get sustained benefit. Now, the next thing that you want to think about is, well, what if your topical is a little bit greasier? What if it contains things like glycerin? Glycerin is a type of ingredient that's used to carry active ingredients into the scalp. And for people who can't tolerate carriers that have a lot of propylene glycol or a lot of alcohol, well, they usually turn to glycerin as a carrier ingredient. The problem with that is that it can be a little bit greasy. So for people with a glycerin-based carrier where there's a lot of grease potential with the way that the scalp might look after application, I would recommend doing the following. First, you would still take your normal drag of a 1 milliliter of the serum, but you would wipe the outside of this with a paper towel to remove all of the external grease from the outside and the glycerin. And you do that so that when you insert it into the scalp, you do so and that grease doesn't spread to the hair itself. So you can keep a scalp looking relatively clean. You can keep the hair looking not so greasy. That's step number one. So by wiping down the outside of the syringe before you put it on your scalp skin, that's going to help to reduce the amount of glycerin or topical residual that then ends up on the hair strand. So your scalp won't look as greasy. Your hair is not going to look as greasy either. So that's a win overall. Now, for people who have really long hair, generally speaking, you can't do what I just did earlier. You can't go from side, let the hair fall down to the other side. You actually need to change your strategy. So for people in this position, you need to comb the hair backwards. And then after you comb the hair, you need to go from front to back. Again, you want to have a system where you cover the scalp entirely in a systematic way. So from left to right or right to left and then front to back. But you just have to be consistent with that because you don't want to keep going over the same territory. But combing the hair back and then using the way that the hair parts to spread the topical, that can be a really easy way to also apply this if you've got longer hair and you can't let the hair fall in the way that I demonstrated earlier. Another thing you want to consider, after you apply your topical, you're undoubtedly going to have some degree of residue on your finger pads. So just go ahead, wash your hands thoroughly afterwards. You want to make sure that there's no residual contact exposure for other family members or people inside your household. Mainly, you want to make sure that ingredients like finasteride, dutasteride, minoxidil remain on the intended user and don't spread to other people, children, pets, etc. With these formulations, this is a very easy thing to do because they're quick drying and that drying almost acts as a sealant afterwards. So that contact, that residual contact exposure, very low likelihood of being problematic overall. But while this is still drying, just wash it off your hands. Put yourself in the best possible position for success. Another thing you want to consider, if you apply this and go to bed immediately thereafter, that's okay, but you have to let it dry before putting your head on the pillow for the same exact reasons that I just described earlier. If you want to maximize your contact with the topical and minimize your partner's contact, if you're sharing pillowcases or if you're sharing a bed together, then you're going to be in a situation where you want to make sure this stuff is dry before you lie down next to somebody. And lastly, consider that 2 milliliters of application exposure per day to just be a ballpark. That number might increase or decrease depending on the severity and the presentation of your hair loss. Diffuse thinners, where the hair loss is more spread out, they're going to require a lot more surface area to cover all potential thinning regions. So you're going to be closer to that 2 milliliter daily application rate. But for people who just have minor temple recession, you just need to be applying this a centimeter or so below the hairline where the thinning starts, and then through that thinning zone up until about a centimeter or two behind where there is thick hair. So in that case, you cover all the zones that have thinned recently, are actively thinning, and then also might have the potential to thin in 2 to 3 years' time. Now, you don't need to apply the topical at the original hairline if you have thinned significantly and your hairline is 4 or 5 inches back. Just apply it a centimeter or two from where the hairline exists and then apply it backwards thereafter. If you want to learn more about that, there are some recoverability considerations that you need to make about treating hair loss, what's reasonable to expect. And we talk about that in other videos. So you don't need to go all the way to the original hairline when you're applying this stuff if you've receded significantly. And the last thing I want to cover is scalp irritation. So some ingredients in certain topicals like retinoic acid for a minority of people can be irritating. In some cases, this irritation comes with benefit. As in the case with tretinoin or retinoic acid, you're increasing cell turnover so that more of the active ingredients inside that topical can penetrate into the scalp skin. And then for minoxidil specifically, you get more activation of the drug as well. But if the irritation becomes cumbersome, problematic, if it's too difficult to deal with, or if you don't have a retinoic acid containing topical and you're still getting irritation, you really need to look into the other ingredients inside the topical. There's this really interesting study that showed that while 2 to 7% of topical minoxidil users report skin irritation as a side effect, 80% of those side effects actually were caused not by the minoxidil ingredient, but by the carrier propylene glycol. You're going to want to consider formulations that don't use propylene glycol if you have a sensitivity to these ingredients or if you just have sensitive skin in general. At Ulo, we formulate all of our topicals without propylene glycol because we want to maximize the ability to use the topical regularly without causing issues for your skin. But we're not the only brand out there. Other people do this as well. So make these considerations when you're selecting what topical might be right for you. Thank you for watching. I hope this video helps you apply topicals and not look greasy and still get results. If you have any questions, please reach out below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.